How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to a video on 5 cheap super saloon cars that you can buy for under £20,000. Recently did a video on depreciated super saloons at a higher budget. I asked for 1,000 likes, I said I'd do it at a lower price point, and here we are. You know the deal, 1,000 likes again and I'll do it at sub 10k or something like that. Now all 5 of these cars are, funnily enough, very fast and also saloons. And they are ordered from slowest to fastest from 0 to 60. Remember that I'm in the UK, so prices in other countries may differ, and remember that whenever you buy any second-hand car, maintenance, repairs, insurance, road tax, all that good stuff is important to remember. As I said, hit the like button if you enjoy the video, subscribe as well if you're new. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's kick this video off with the most powerful car on this list, the Bentley Continental Flying Spur, which I've mentioned in previous videos, but only really in relation to how luxurious it is. It is also a rapid car considering the size, thanks to its 6-litre twin-turbocharged W12 engine, which puts out 552 brake horsepower and 650 Nm of torque, which takes from 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds. Now, while it is the slowest car to 60 on this list, it also has the second highest top speed at 194 miles per hour, which is just ridiculous levels of pace out of a car that weighs almost 3 tons when filled with fuel. And by the way, that's the highest top speed if you exclude cars that have to be delimited first. It also benefits from a Torsen all-wheel drive system, adaptive air suspension, and continuous damping control to maximise the softness of the ride, but also ensure it turns corners without too much body roll from that massive weight. It's so big, in fact, that it can technically fit into the limousine class of car rather than just being a standard saloon, and in its early years it was sometimes referred to as the world's fastest limousine. There are videos of people even taking these to go drag racing and getting a 12.8 second quarter-mile time, all thanks to that mad torque. And of course, I can't talk about this car without mentioning that luxury. You'll benefit from a far more luxurious and enjoyable experience on the interior than any of the other cars on this list. And having read the original brochure for this car, there were numerous specs you could have had if you bought it from factory, depending on just how luxurious you wanted it to be. £14,000, the lowest that I could find these listed for with higher mileages, and for £20,000 you'll get a 2005 example with as low as 30,000 miles on the clock. I've spoken about the reliability in many previous videos, and the story is basically that many owners have seen great longevity out of these engines as they aren't strained at all for normal road use. However, when problems do arise, repairs can be cripplingly expensive, and the price of maintenance more generally is very expensive too. A good example of this is the coil packs, which cost £25 a piece on a VW Polo and £350 on a Flying Spur, plus the fact there are more of them and they are more difficult to change on the Bentley, meaning if you can't do the work yourself, you'll be paying hefty fees for that work. In my last video on depreciated super saloons, I mentioned the Jaguar XFR, which is an insane and rare beast in its own right. But if that's out of budget, the XFR is a similar story at a lower price point. You get a 5-litre supercharged V8, putting out 502 brake horsepower, which gets the car from 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, just 3/10 slower than the XFR. Like the Bentley, it also comes with adaptive dampers, but slightly more geared towards performance, though not at the expense of any comfort, as ultimately this is an executive saloon with a big engine thrown into it. When new, the car was around £80,000, which is around the same you'd pay today for a BMW M3 or equivalent, so Jaguar were directly aiming for the fast saloon market and trying to compete against their German counterparts. This is also backed up by the fact that its predecessor, the S-Type R, was aimed at competing in that same bracket, just with slightly older competition. It's a great sounding V8 engine too, as Jaguar were just starting to make the most of their engine sounds, as we're more accustomed to in their more recent cars like the F-Type. Of course, it's not as savage sounding as the XFRS, but it's not far away, and many owners like to put on the Quicksilver exhaust to get some of that sound out of it. And in terms of actual performance, the XFR was faster around the Top Gear test track than the C6 Corvette, Aston Martin V12 Vantage, and the Ferrari 575M Maranello GTC, so it's not messing around. It's worth noting the facelifts on these too, as these were updated in 2011 to get slightly more aggressive lights both front and rear, and more aggressive bumpers too. I personally prefer this look, but you may think differently. 12 grand is around the minimum you'll find these listed for, and for £20,000 you'll be looking at a 2010 example with under 60,000 miles on the clock. With servicing every 10,000 miles, the AJ V8 engine is known to be pretty bulletproof, but the eDiff can suffer problems resulting from the diff locking motor, and there have been reports of rust around boot lids. Owners mainly complain about the hefty running costs on these though, with 24.4 miles per gallon quoted by Jag, and tyres and pads wearing out relatively quickly. Next up is one of my favourite cars on this list, in a spec that no one is ever really after, the original Audi RS6, but specifically in saloon spec with its 4.2 litre twin turbocharged V8 built by both Audi and Cosworth that puts out 443 brake horsepower, which gets the car from 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. As you may know, RS stands for Rennsport in German, which is translated into racing sport, so the fundamental idea behind the RS6 is to build a bit of a monster inspired by Audi's forays into racing. For the time, the RS6 had some of the newest and most exceptional engineering Audi had to offer, and the estate version of the RS6 in all of its generations has been a highly popular car. The saloon, however, has been sort of overlooked in comparison, and it was ultimately dropped after only the second generation. It was actually used as a race car for 3 years in the North American Speed World Challenge GT series, and was highly successful, winning the Manufacturers' Championship in 2003 and 2004. The race car actually used basically the same engine as you'll find in the road car, but modified even further by Cosworth to maximise performance. What makes this car so particularly quick is the merging of that V8 engine with variable inlet valve timing and the twin turbos, which means you'll get peak torque out of the car from 1950 to 5600 RPM, which is just insane. You'll always feel like you're blitzing it along with the pedal down, and you'll be in some comfort too, in the Recaro bucket seats on the interior and otherwise relatively reserved interior that is consistent with other Audis of the time. And from a visual perspective, I think this car is starting to age really well, as it looks more classic every year. Give it 10 years or so and I reckon this car will be heavily sought after. The highest mileage examples of these are available for around the £10,000 mark, and there are quite a few available up to the £20,000 mark, but you're probably looking at £16,000 for one of these in decent condition. Given this is a pretty special car, you will need to follow a pretty special maintenance schedule to keep it running. There have been examples of turbos failing on these as a result of leaks from seals, pipes and cam cover gaskets. It's worth noting too that the auto box on these is quite old, so gear shifts won't feel as quick as some more modern cars, and the torque converter does have a reputation for going wrong in high mileage examples. And running costs are pretty high too, with a combined fuel economy figure of 19.3 miles per gallon. I hope you're enjoying the video. If you are, just a reminder, hit the like button, I'd really appreciate it. 1,000 likes and I'll do sub £10,000 instead. And approximately 85% of you aren't subscribed, so if you are one of those people, do hit the subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. Trying to hit 100k this year and I would appreciate your support. Just missing out on the top spot is the car on this list that probably has the biggest cult following, despite not being known for its reliability, the E60 BMW M5 with its naturally aspirated 5 litre V10 engine, which makes 499 brake horsepower, taking the car from 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, matching the RS6. This is such a massively heralded car in the car community, and it's becoming more of a classic by the second. One of the reasons why it's so highly regarded is in fact that high revving V10 engine, which made the M5 the first ever production V10 saloon when it was released in 2004, just before Audi followed up with their second gen RS6. This V10 came as a result of BMW's collaboration with the Sauber F1 team, which at the time was running BMW V10s. So it might be plausible to assume that BMW ensured the engine rev so high to sort of replicate the sound F1 cars were making at the time. Its out and out speed is also befitting of a super saloon, as though it's limited to 155 miles per hour or 190 with the M driver's pack. Owners have noted that delimited it will go over 200 miles per hour with no additional modifications. But if you don't want to use all of that speed and power, you can press a power button in these, which basically drops the power down from 499 to 395 brake horsepower, which is still an insane amount of power for daily driving. Not that I think you want to daily drive one of these, given they're quoted at doing 19 miles per gallon, though owners note more like 12 miles per gallon. The car has more aggressive style than the standard 5 Series models and has a wider track too, as well as all the other expected features on a fast saloon to help the car achieve an 8:13 lap time at the Nürburgring. £12,000 is around the minimum you'll find these listed for, and at £20,000 you're looking at a 2005 model with around 50,000 miles on it. Reliability on these is very much what lets them down though. The amount of horror stories you'll find on owners forums is unbelievable. There are plenty of known issues like the red cog of death, the valve springs breaking, which is a $10,000 repair, and the SMG3 gearbox is known to have problems too. It's very much a car to own as a classic in my opinion, that you take out for fun drives on the weekend and just let it flex that V10. Taking the top spot on this list is the Mercedes C63 AMG, which despite being named a 63 actually has a 6.2 litre or 6,208cc naturally aspirated V8 engine, which puts out 450 brake horsepower, the second lowest on this list, but it's still the quickest with a 0 to 60 time of 4.4 seconds. performance. This was the 3rd generation C-Class, but the C63 AMG was theoretically the first AMG Mercedes to be specifically designed from scratch, rather than just built off of the existing car's platform. So where the previous generation C55 AMG had been modified from existing C-Class cars, the C63 AMG was purpose-built, which was massively helpful in terms of performance, particularly in the handling department, as the car was known as having the most responsive steering of any Mercedes at the time. Interestingly, it has the exact same Nürburgring lap time as the M5, but as it's slightly newer, it benefits from better interior technology and styling, which I'd say has remained pretty modern looking considering the car's now 13 years old. It also came as a coupe and estate, and weirdly, unlike newer models where I'd say the coupe is the better looking example, I actually think the saloon is prettier. When new, you could also buy a performance pack example, which is sort of like an S example on today's models. It increased horsepower by 17 and provided stiffer suspension and more carbon fibre around the car to increase the Savage look slightly further. These start at around the £12,000 mark, and for 20 grand you get a 2010 example with less than 50,000 miles on the clock. They're relatively reliable too, although there are some known issues which are rare but pretty much game over for your engine, like head gasket failure for a few models. More common issues are wear on the crankshaft and a leaking intake manifold. Overheating is also prevalent on post-facelift cars, which you can solve, but it's quite pricey, and in general all maintenance on these comes with a nice Mercedes premium. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something new. If you did, a like would be much appreciated. Massive thanks to the patrons as always for the continued support, and to you guys as well for watching. I'll see you in the next one.